Okay, so I think I'm not going to do the slide view. I tried, but you're going to have to see the other things in it.
That's fine.
Okay. All right, so first of all, thanks so much for joining us this evening. It's good to see some familiar names. And thank you, PPAC, for the opportunity and for continuously making the space for conversation. And if I may, I'm going to introduce myself in Tagalog, my first language. And this is the abbreviated version. Magandang umaga, it's morning there. Pasig ang ilog, Bisaya ang nanay, Ilocano ang tatay, Tagalog ako, nakatira sa lupa ng Lenape. Sa tabi ng dating batis na tawag Tumanaraming, nakalipas ay karamihan ay lobo, Delaware ang ilog, ako ay si Maria. And in translation, greetings, Pasig is the river, my mother is Bisaya, my father is Ilocano, I am Tagalog. I dwell in Lenape land, near the now vanished stream Tumanaraming, where the wolves throng the area. Delaware is the river, my name is Maria. And I think I'm going to say the rest of my talk in Tagalog. Just kidding, I won't do that because I think only 2 of you will understand it. But disclosure, full disclosure, I am not a historian or a scientist or a social studies expert. I'm really not an expert in anything. I'm merely sharing with you what I experience, what I know, and what I do. I would like to mainly share with you the work I'm doing this year, which is Benevolent Assimilation, scenes that do not represent who we are. But before I get into this today, it's necessary that I present you a background of the work. A few years ago, I started working on a series of installation, which I call History in RGB. It consists of a series of prints installed amid plants, lights, mosquito nets, and transparent color filters that viewers are able to carry with them through the installation. So the filters are red, green, and blue. It represents images of history, popular culture, mythic folklore, landscapes, and creatures. And the prints are digitally collaged images of old photographs and prints from and about the Philippines from various archives such as a few archives in the Philippines, in the universities, as well as Library of Congress and some other academic libraries here. So this is what it looks like without the filter. And if you look through the filter, this is a demo. So I'm just going to let this play. So I was saying that the prints are digitally collaged and the images are stripped of their original color. Then they're reassigned with the value of a specific color based on a tropical Pantone palette. And Tropical Pantone palette is an American company that also constructs color palettes. So I picked out what is defined as tropical in the Pantone palette, and I narrowed it down to 16 colors and rearranged the order of the colors depending on the value system of red, green, and blue. The reassignment of color is based on this value system, and viewing each print through one of the 3 filters, select images become visible while simultaneously obscuring other elements. The filters become tools for revelation and clarity as they isolate elements to create a monochromatic narrative. They also produce a modeled background by obfuscating the other narratives that exist on the same surface. Does anyone have any questions? What we're looking at right now? Because I realize this might not be clear for everybody what's happening here. Okay. So this came out of my interest in how images and by extension, history, desire, and experience are mediated phenomena. As an immigrant and a member of a Filipino diaspora and an image producer, I recall the narratives that I grew up studying and hearing, as well as narratives that I more recently learned and unlearned. As with places that have a history of colonization, I grew up in a country where education and culture are based on the education system of the colonizer. I studied my people's history based on books written by Americans. In order to be educated and to pave the way for upward mobility, one has to adapt to signs, value systems, and languages of power from the colonizers. So the Philippines was ruled by the Spanish for 377 years, and for context, the U.S. Occupied the Philippines for over 35 years, and then it continues to have military presence and bases to this point. So even though the Filipinos fought for independence from Spain all through the occupation of the Spaniards, there was rebellion all throughout, and close to when the Philippines was actually going to be independent by 1898, the US stepped in with the guise of helping kick out the Spaniards. But what actually happened is the islands, along with Cuba and Puerto Rico, were illegally ceded to the US at the Treaty of Paris for $20 million after the Spanish-American War. So yeah, the Treaty of Paris did not include Puerto Rico, Cuba, Hawaii, or Philippines. So English was used upon us. It came to be understood as the language of the civilized world. We grew up believing that the Americans were our saviors. The recognized and published Filipino literature was first written in Spanish and then in English. Between the imposed American education system and the Catholic Church's claim to moral authority, my initial exposure to beliefs, culture, and importance can be summed up with images of Catholicism and Hollywood. So this is the same image. I don't know if you figured that out, but this is with the green filter. This is with the red. And this is another illustration of it. So you can see it's zoomed in more. So obviously on the left, you have the green filter, red on the right. So with my family, I immigrated to US as immigrants do. My first professional jobs and my initial interest in image production came from photography and studying art history. It was the beginning of my fascination with the notion of truth as an unfixed entity, for truth to be part of the dialogue in looking at and understanding indexical images. Whether one is wanting to believe that there is some kind of truth or asking whose truth is being represented and who has the power to define the truth. I wondered about my individual understanding as part of a collective history, and as an immigrant, one who is viewed through a lens. Oh, and this one is actually shown right now outside of PPAC. So if you want to interact with this particular print. And of course, I have this script that I'm reading, but if you have any questions on what's going on in each image, please just unmute yourselves and I'll be happy to tell you what this is about specifically. So this one is actually the Killing of Magellan by a Datu, like a chief, Lapu-Lapu. So growing up in the Philippines, I recall hearing stories of truly frightening, visceral creatures, ghost stories, and folktales. There were stories of demons, shapeshifters, witches, tree gods, ghouls, dwarves, and flying vampires with bat wings whose bodies split in half and have tongues that stretch and thin out to the size of a thread to feed on babies. They were old stories that were passed down orally and told in my native tongue. Most of them were based on indigenous oral traditions of storytelling and honoring the land and waters. Though the stories were still mediated firsthand by the storyteller and based on pre-colonial stories, they felt present and real to me because they were set in the place and time I was in. These stories were neither in books nor on the elementary reading list, nor were they recognized as literature. So this is one of my manananggal. She has these bat wings, and she splits her torso in half and she leaves her bottom half amongst the banana trees. So this piece is called an alay, isang alay at manananggal. So alay is like, so ally in English, like, you know what an ally is, and alay in Tagalog is an offering. It could mean an offering or a helper. So she is they have this thing called what do they call them? I don't recall what they call this friendly American term. Well, they distributed American flags to the Filipinos so that they can wave them. And I picked her as my good citizen. So she's a good citizen during the day. But at night she becomes this manananggal. And here's another illustration of that. So other than the oral tradition of storytelling or gossiping and a few obscure resources, these indigenous stories were neither passed on in the academic discourse, nor were they culturally celebrated. They were simply not discussed in schools or institutions. Folktales as oral tradition are considered lower mythology. They have been used as an explanation against logic and oh, sorry, I skipped that. So they are considered lower mythology. The stories can be both dangerously superstitious and unscrupulous, especially for the uneducated. They have been used as an explanation against logic and as a justification for unexplained injustices, as a way to control the illiterate. However, there were also parables and were mostly based on our relationship with nature and the values the indigenous lived by before colonization. So this piece is actually right now at the Michener. So this is without filter, with green, and then with red. And and then in 2019, so this is actually my work before the lockdown. So 2019 marked the 20th anniversary, or sorry, 250th anniversary of Captain James Cook's arrival in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center, in partnership with Auckland Museum, staged Te Whainga, which is a 4-day immersive experience exploring the meanings of coexisting within our colonized communities and societies. So I had the privilege to go there several times and new work. And I was there to engage and collaborate with the artists and activists from various oceanic Pacific islands. So the best part of it all and most honorable is meeting and learning from the beautiful people, including Maori, Samoans, Hawaiians, and other people of Asian Pacific and Oceanic Polynesian descent. So those are my prints. I also did a few, this is Rosanna Raymond's performance, and used with my images in the backdrop. So these are the images I produced according to their origin stories and colonial past present histories, as well as like conflicts that are happening today. I connected them back to the present and connected the natural resources that have gone extinct or are in jeopardy at the moment. And these are the performers. So I realized I don't have, just like I did with the earlier pieces with the tropical series, I have like illustration of like the red, green, and then the image. I don't have that here, but this is my sketch, just to give you an idea of my original sketch of how I do this, how I construct the image. So I would do all these black and white sketches, and I'm going to show you some more of that later on. So fast forward. Okay, so hopefully that gave you enough information about like the past work. Does anyone have any questions about the history in RGB, what I've done or how I'm doing that? Or so those are all analog experience with the filters, if that's not clear.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
Especially with the orphanage. I mean, the kids in the mission school. The Thomasites.
Yeah.
Is there a reason why the green, it blocks out the children's faces? Is there a political or what are the reasons where red opens up the faces of the children and the green opens up the faces of the colonialists and the Thomasites? Is there a reason for that?
I just wanted to separate them. So the original photo is really them together, right? So this is one photo, but then I added on a volcanic eruption in the back. There's a tree god on the side. But the original photograph is with the kids with their indigenous clothing, and then they're being educated by the Thomasites, and also on the right is Howard Taft. That was one of his first trip to the Philippines. And he is part of that campaign of educating, civilizing the Filipinos. So I didn't want to do the filters. I didn't want to assign the filters as good or bad or neutral, or I didn't want it to be specifically like when it's red, it shows you indigenous. When it's green, it's the US story. I actually mixed that up, and I didn't specify which is which because I also wanted to have the element of surprise from the viewer and a sense of discovery. So I just, for this, I just separated, even though the original is the same picture, I separated the kids from the colonizer. Just a way to have them exist on their own in this one.
But also connect them with the tree god and the
volcanic group.
Yeah,
that's correct.
It's very cool.
Oh, thanks. Thank you. Any other before I go to benevolent assimilation? Okay, so in the last year, with the global pandemic and the political and social unrest and the accelerated damage done by the Trump administration, along with its influence in affirming US's attachment to white supremacy. When the insurrection occurred in the Capitol Hill in the beginning of the year, Biden said that, quote, "the scenes of chaos at the Capitol do not represent who we are." So that's where that second part of his title is. When he said that, I was reminded of how confused many of us were in November 9, 2016, the day after the election, when we woke up thinking that we thought we knew who we are and how far we've come along as a country. Apparently that many of us thought we knew or think about ourselves as a country is not who we are. I ask, with these scenes that occurred, do they not represent who we are? So in my attempt to make sense of things in this last year, I looked up recorded history, not specifically the history of the Philippines and how the US colonized it, but rather the history of the United States as a colonizer. So I wanted to acknowledge this country not by talking about the Filipino story, but the actual hidden American story, one that is part of this country's identity. I wanted to understand better this country, not specifically my history. So in other words, I want to understand not specifically my history as a Filipino or Filipino American or immigrant or brown person, but the history of the US and its own framing of history. So I zoomed into the time around the turn of the 20th century. So approximately late 1890s up to 1920s. So this is soon after the Wounded Knee Massacre, soon after the Morale Campaign of Manifest Destiny, soon after annexing the contiguous land in North America. So this is the little known history of America's first overseas war of empire in the Philippines. So the Philippine-US War. So if you came in late, I did have a disclosure in the beginning that I'm not a historian or I'm not an expert in all of this. So I'm trying to explain this as the way I understand it. So this map, I'm sharing this map because think about the logo of the US. Imagine how it looks in a map. And you think about the logo of the US map, right? Which is like this. This is how we think of the US. But when in fact, US sovereignty should represent a pointillist map. We don't want to think of the US as an imperial, right? So the actual map of the US in 1910 should have been what these green ones are. So I made this into I colored these map where I made all the ones that are greenish yellow, which is this, Alaska, Puerto Rico, Cuba, Panama, some pointillist islands here. I don't know if you see that. Sorry that I'm not able to do the slide view right now. Perhaps I can make this bigger. Yeah, so if you look, there's like all these yellow and green all over, right? And then Hawaii is here, there's Guam, there's Mariana Islands, American Samoa. So like the US map, yeah, should really look like this, not like this, right? To be realistic, to be honest. So as brilliantly named as Manifest Destiny, I know this is a lot of, I had to add this. So as brilliantly named as Manifest Destiny, benevolent assimilation is a terminology or a proclamation that that President Michener declared that this is like part of it. It's a lot of words. You can read it if you want, or you look it up. But what I want to point out is that his original version was about the original version that he sent to his generals in the Philippines had to be edited. So they had to substitute free people for supremacy of the United States. And then they deleted to exercise future domination. They took out a lot of things, which are like very obvious that are like racist and not really treating Filipinos as humans. So pretty much what benevolent assimilation is that the US went to the Philippines to help desperate population that needed a colonial tutelage and stewardship. Despite the Philippines had been fighting for independence from Spain. So the story of the occupation of the Philippines is at odds with what is told in the US about why the US was there in the first place and the degree of which he was welcomed with open arms. So the super powerful imperial US imposes sovereignty over developing country. So so there was like a lot of images that I found that were from this time, from American archives. And I'm going to zoom out of this. So this is one of the print that I have, and this is shown at Drexel right now, Pearlstein Gallery. So, so this image, I incorporated a lot of Kodak advertisements, all from that time, early 1900s, because apparently Kodak was also, that's the same time that Kodak became a consumer, it was available for consumers, and it became one of the tools that was weaponized in weaponized in this war, where the camera was taken to the Philippines to photograph people, to photograph the landscape, to get the lay of the land, to create an archive of people and catalog them as criminals. They did like the profile, like the frontal, like mugshots, like they have mugshots of all these people that they capture, and to differentiate them and just like keep them contained. So I wanted to incorporate the Kodak, the real Kodak ads, and incorporate it with the images of war and the contradictions of what is being told here in the US, how the US was selling the war to the people versus what is actually happening there, right? So there's like a lot of control and policing. So there's like roots in policing and militarization. So this one, and I'm sorry I don't have the black and white image of this. I might have it. Actually, I might have it somewhere. I have it in my studio. So this is, all right, so this one has, this is actually the original ad over here. This is the correspondent. And I know it's hard to read this, but you have to have the filters to actually make this visible. So the correspondent, it's showing that you know, in war as in peace, you want to bring your Kodak because that's part of your weapon, not just your guns, right? And then actually there's what you don't see here, and you see it in another filter, is there's like all these bodies, dead bodies here from a newspaper illustration that I cut out. And then yeah, just going along with the technology of photography, I kept a lot of its framing and the context of putting it back to the photograph, because photograph was so useful in that they bring it back and then they show a lot of things that show, they show a lot of savages, and they show the before and after of when we civilized those savages and educated them. So this is part of also another propaganda that was shown, and I'm going to try to read this. So the original photograph, so this is all from the same photograph. So Colonel Batson, that's him and his scouts. So this American, white American dude, plus this guy, they're in another color. And then I included a cartoon text that I found where it's called A Red Letter Day. So this piece is called A Red Letter Day. So this stranger says, "How long have you been civilized?" And then a native says, "Ever since my home was burned to the ground and my wife and children shot," right? So that's, you know, that's a measure, like a time frame of when they became civilized. So these are the Filipinos working with the American soldiers.
Maria, that's a stereoscope.
And then, yes.
And that's the language that was on the bottom of the stereoscope?
No, this was the language in the original, which is this one on the right,
Okay.
the Colonel Batson's. This joke, A Red Letter Day joke, it came from a cartoon
Wow.
that I found from that time.
Really hard.
And then this one is also a photograph. The original photograph is these white American gentlemen, and it's actually called Gentlemen's. No photo. And then, so I this is one photograph, but then I found these photographs. I don't know if you can see them here. There's actually Filipino soldiers here, all dressed up also in white. These are the ones that were captured they were captured and then dressed up more civil wise, and trained to serve the US military. And the original caption of this little photo, these people, the Filipinos here, are what it says here. And it says, no photograph can give an adequate idea of the native soldiers in their spotless uniforms of white duck waistcoat and trousers with hats of Manila straw. Their guileless and innocent appearance is a good cover for their crafty natures. So that caption is talking about these Filipinos, but I incorporated the American soldiers in this photograph and had them wear the Filipinos.
Mm.
And then this one is called the water cure. And I have my sketches in my studio. I could probably just like flash them here. Like I could show you here after I do the slideshow. So this one is, again, playing with the idea of a constructed image and the framing of image and what gets shown in the US, what makes it back as a propaganda. So this one is, there's actually an image of the soldiers that are like, this is the kind of image that they want to show the Americans. Like, oh, they're like watching the borders, they're keeping an eye and keeping the Philippines safe. But at the same time, the benevolent assimilation includes water cure, right? Water cure is like the early version of, well, it's exactly waterboarding, but they call it the water cure. So they did this to the insurgents that they capture. And that's the kind of thing that is not officially sanctioned by the military, but if everybody's doing it and no one's saying anything about it, then it is sanctioned, right? So that's like the kind of thing that you have to realize that benevolent assimilation is like, well, this is to help them, but what's actually practiced is a whole other thing that's not mentioned. So it's really really gets under what's visible. And then this one is this is a Kodak ad. Sorry, this series is like really hard for me. So this series is an ad, a Kodak ad that says there are no game laws and no accidents for those who hunt with Kodak. Right. So these are two kids, American kids, with their guns and their camera. Oh, sorry. But then I'm actually going to zoom in. So on the upper right, there is actually a clip from a newspaper. And this is something that was declared. There was an insurgent attack, Balangiga, where it's amazing counter. It's amazing revolution that I wouldn't say revolution, like an attack by the locals. So the Americans, it's not like it's anything that you haven't heard of if you follow any wars, really, that they go to town, occupy, and then, I guess, interrogate people that are suspicious and try to get some clues where the insurgents are. So the insurrecto, they staged this attack on the American soldiers where the women and children actually left town, and then the men were wearing women's clothes, and they smuggled some weapons and put them in coffins, and they even put like actual dead bodies in the coffins, like dead child, which is amazing. And then the Americans would go through their stuff, and one time they actually opened the coffin and there was a dead child in it, but underneath it is all the guns. So there's all these like, and then the Americans are just like, okay, I don't have to look at all of you, and kind of felt bad. But the Filipinos did this like silent attack. And so, long story short, the Americans said, kill everyone who's over 10 years old. So pretty much that happened in this one area where they executed, anyone that was over in this island, in one island in Mindanao. So that's the Balangigam massacre. So I wanted to incorporate that story and incorporate the children there, as well as the children that were being sold, what the children are being sold here. And so part of, sorry, it's really hard. See, when I did the mythology, the first versions of mythology, the tropical series, that was so much fun to me because I get to research all these mythological creatures and indigenous stories that I grew up hearing. But this last year is just like I looked at a lot of historical stuff that were not pleasant, and I was looking for reasons where, well, if I'm taking out the magic out of this work, right? Because like in the previous work, I was incorporating mythology and original origin stories of indigenous people, and it was really magical. But this time, because I'm looking at it through the American lens, and just using the stuff that's here, really, I realized that the magic and the mythology is consumption and capitalism, and what is being sold to the Americans to make this war justifiable. So it's like it's really actually emotional for me, this series. So anyway, so one of the things that I looked up also is like around that time, there was, when the US came to the Philippines, they didn't really know what was there. So, that's again part of the camera. And they sent all these experts, anthropologists, and I think at the time anthropology was fairly new. So phrenology is an older science, but it has like connection to anthropology and sociology. And I think I saw some sociologists on the viewers here, so maybe you can chime in later and correct me. Yeah, so phrenology is like framing people, like, if you have this kind of nose, you're going to be a criminal, like looking at a child right from the beginning and seeing the series, the progress of development of people, and how they end up, who they are, if they're successful or they're going to be, menace to society. And so I wanted that background, and that some of the sciences that were brought to the Philippines as part of their research. And I wanted to incorporate that, all these pseudoscience that documented the Filipinos. So they had books that were like categorizing the people, like including children, and they photographed them like criminals. Like, these are mugshots here. And you'll see this, this is visible only in certain filters. So there's album of Filipinos and different types of Filipinos, depending on where they're from, what island they're from, and what language do they speak. And then I did part of the benevolent assimilation is educating people, right? Like civilizing and educating. And it's going to be a friendly war. It's going to be a savage war of peace, right? That's the other one, another series of words that were used, that you would read, that they were going back and forth between the military and policing, saying, oh, we need to do this savage war of peace. It's like it's part of the white man's burden, right? So part of what was like happening is the education is having the girls do crafts, and I have that in my sketch. So part of what they were doing is crafts of training kids and women to work on service and working mass-produced lace, right? So that this is eventually like in the 1910s, after, when the insurgents were like dying down. So I wanted to incorporate like these ads. So this is, again, this is the magic that was sold to the US. So there's a bunch of house dresses for housewives in the US, and they were selling all these lace shirts, nighties made in hand embroidered from Puerto Rico and the Philippines. And you'll see it in fashion magazines. Like this has like a Spanish flair on it. Well, obviously because this came from like, you know, the Spanish colonized countries. So I wanted to incorporate the different schools that did that, and then tie it back to present day, how part of the education is really part of training these countries to work in the production for the consumption of the US. So, you know, they were trained to work with, you know, with capitalist interest. So, so that's what that is. And then I included the gun in there because the gun, so this is a story where one of the stories I heard is that the insurgents were so, especially the Moros, which are the Muslims in the South, they were charging at the Americans, and the guns that the Americans have were not strong enough, that it was not stopping the Moros. So as the Americans would shoot, the Moros keep charging, and then they only had like these bolo knives, and they would, like, if they get close enough, then they can hack the Americans. So that was like their fighting power. So so there are all these letters from American soldiers sending to the US saying like, hey, our guns are not strong enough. We need something that has a stopping power, right? Like, so that's the title of this piece, Stopping Power, because they didn't have enough of the ammunition, or they need a better technology to kill the Filipinos and stop them right from the beginning. So, because like, yeah, the crazy Filipinos, yeah, that's where I'm from. Yeah, so we, like, you just can't shoot once. We'll keep going forward because we're going to be dead anyway. And then sometimes the Americans would have these bayonets, and, you know, the bayonets are long. So I heard of stories where the Moros would actually like pull the bayonet closer just so they can get closer to the American, you know, and it just throws off the Americans. It's like, oh, I didn't know you had like an agenda there, you know. So I, you know, I tried to find humor in this. Anyway, so yeah, this is another one. Yeah, so I'm also going to show you some sketches. So that's why this is still a work in progress. This is really, like I said, this is a difficult project that, you know, to look through a lot of triggering images. But I'm going to show you some sketches and talk about some of my processes. So for this series of work, the Benevolent Assimilation, I gathered color palettes from that time in America. So around 1900. So this is like, you'll see that the color palette is somewhere between this and this. This is like, I narrowed it down to this, and then I narrowed it down some more to this. Okay, so this is how I arrange it. So you'll see on the left to right, it's red, green, and blue. So the same 16 colors, I rearrange them according to red, green, and blue, so that you can see when they shift, and then the placement of the colors change depending on the filter. And I can explain that more. I have better slides for that. But this is the color palette that I ended up having for this series. And then I have these sketches. I don't normally share them, but because, you know, I feel like this is part of the process too. So this is all the sketch. This is some of the sketches that I have been working on as part of this. And again, this is all based on like American archives. There is a photographer, or was a photographer, that took a lot of photos in the Philippines, and I'm blanking out what his name is, but there is a collection in Midwest. And surprisingly, there's a lot of photographs, a lot of archives in Midwest, including anthropological skulls anthropological findings of skulls and burial sites stuff in Midwest. Does anyone have any questions? So this is another Kodak album. So this is the Kodak album, Kodak advertisement selling the camera and the film to these ladies who are going to college. But I wanted to include that as part of like this girls' school in the mountains. And then there's the brownie camera, and I incorporated it with the photographs that were taken, that were sold. So this is the original ad of the brownie camera. So it's like, it looks like there's a kid sleeping and they're photographing the kid sleeping. And I incorporated it with the actual photographs of the dead in the Philippines. So I was really interested in both the camera and the weapons as technology of the time. And so this is unresolved to me. That's why they're all sketches right now. So this kid, he's like the son of one of the sultans. And this is the same kid here. But the interesting thing is just like how regal he looks here. But then, you know, this American soldier picks him up and like, oh, take a picture of me, right, for my Instagram. And then there's a lot of like before and after, right? So this is part of what is brought back to the US. It's like, this is why we need to civilize them, right? Just to justify to Americans why this savage wars are necessary for peace. It's because look at them, they're, you know, before and after, this is what they look like. And then this is how they look like, you know, this is the progress through time. But again, this is like a setup photography. It's probably all done in the same day. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of the photographs that was also taken of the people as specimens. So there's like sections of, there's like a book called American Anthropologists, the People of the Philippines. And it's just so hard to read these because, you know, it really talk about people as subjects, right? Which is, you know, very typical of colonial mentality of, you know, subjugating and treating them as specimens. So these are actual photographs from the from the American that was in the Philippines. So they photograph them the same way. Some of them, they photograph them the same way as they would with objects, right? So these are like objects that were gathered, and then to just show how subjective it all was, right? Yeah, and how they were talked about. And then some of them are just like less, you know, it's very obvious to me, but I don't know, I'll explain it. But so a lot of texts, a lot of advertisements at the time were really advertising and showing like ownership, right? So there's like an ad for this swimsuit company, you know, and then there's a lot of like, you know, the tiki bar, like there's a lot of tropical theme, like Hawaiian theme all over around that time. And, you know, there's ads like this that has like this and it says ours. So I wanted to incorporate that with owning people. So this one is another stereograph, and the original stereograph caption is "Our young Filipinos in holiday attire at the 4th of July celebration." Mm-hmm. So 4th of July is an American holiday. Filipinos have don't give a about it. They don't know what it is. Like they're, there's like ironic thing is like we're celebrating the independence of the US in a place that's not independent, and actually independence is taken away by the Americans. So it's like really hard to look at like things like this, and then you see the kids just doing what they're supposed to do. Yeah, I could discuss things with people. I'm just showing whatever I have here. I could talk about some other things, but I think, so this Benevolent Assimilation series is, I'm still working on it. I have like these prints right now showing right now. But I feel like I need to explore more of it, because there's a lot of things I wanted to talk about, and how a lot of the things were tried and tested in the Philippines. And it ties back to what's happening here, and it's always been tied to it. And we don't acknowledge it as part of American history. Most Americans don't even know we had a Filipino-American War, and even after the president in the US declared mission accomplished, there was actually war going on there. And so a lot of the militarization and policing was practiced there, tried and tested. And to this day, they're like, you could reframe it and just cross out the word Philippines and put down Iraq in there, or anything locally, like how people are surveilled and are profiled and controlled in this country, how that's also tested there.
Yeah. Mary.
And then there's also
Sorry.
Go on.
Mary wrote, this is terrible. This is exactly what the cops said about Michael Brown and why they shot him. So, I mean, like, it's apparent that the Philippines were testing grounds for a lot of the kinds of violence projected on people. It's almost 8, and I do want to see I don't know what you think, Maria. Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you, and I empathize with how difficult this work is, and I really appreciate your generosity in sharing it with us tonight. But I do want to give some space for people to ask questions about this. Yeah. And I just also want to say that seeing the pieces that you have in the other galleries makes me want to make a point to get to the galleries before they come down, because I want to experience the work in person. Does people have questions? You can either unmute yourself or raise your hand. It's up to you. Or put it in the chat.
I know it's such a downer, right?
No.
I'm sorry.
I think it's work.
Thank you.
And go ahead, Mary.
Hi, Maria. Congratulations.
Hi, Mary.
This is amazing.
Thank you.
I'm really moved and horrified, but I mean, horrified in a way that I think you're trying to do through your work, but incredible work. I just have just a really kind of silly question. Have you thought of like going to things like the Kodak Museum in Rochester, New York, or the connections that you see between the skulls that are held by the Penn Museum and the controversy about that, or the controversy of the MOVE bombing and the bones? They just announced today that the public health commissioner Farley had to resign today, because it turned out they had destroyed the remains of several MOVE the bombing victims of the MOVE bombing, that they had destroyed the bones in 2017
and disposed of them.
Yeah.
Actually, just so not everybody here is in Philly area, and I realize like the move bombing is one of those incidents that happened in this country that many Americans don't know, and even people in Philly don't know that this happened. Could someone explain it better than me, maybe, what the move bombing was about? Or I will try. Okay, so there was a group of people called the move movement. Is that what they are? But I think someone else. Lori, help me out here.
Oh, it's the African family. They were a group of people that followed the teachings of John Africa, and they lived the way they chose the way they lived, and it went against the dominant culture's idea of what civilized, right? So I mean, it's the same
civilized,
colonial and white supremacist language, but they were called uncivilized, and it led to a incredible hatred towards this family, extended family. It was a commune, and over many years. But there's quite a few documentaries right now on HBO Max and Netflix. I can put some in the letter that follows up, but it culminated, this conflict between the city, the police, the fire department, and people living in neighborhoods. It culminated in a bombing that happened 36 years ago today. An incendiary bomb was dropped on their house. There were 11 people in the house that perished in the bombing, but it also destroyed 6 city blocks of homes in Philadelphia, and that neighborhood has not recovered. And if you're interested and you live in Philly, there's going to be a march on Saturday, and we'll start from Osage and Cobbs Creek, and we'll march to Malcolm X Park.
It's actually happening right now tonight.
Oh, there's one tonight.
Yeah, there's one tonight because today is the actual, as you said, the actual anniversary. There may be one on Saturday, but definitely it's happening right now as well.
So what Mary was talking about, so they found, thank you, Lori, for explaining that, Mary. So the skulls of some of the people that were in that bombing, they were taken by was it a sociologist, anthropologist? Like they took the skulls of some of them and they stored it in Princeton, and it was lost, and then it was found again, and then they were showing it to students for studying, I don't know, anthropology.
It was for so they found not the skulls, but a part of a pelvis.
Oh,
and they suspected that it was one of the young girls that had died. They weren't sure. There were 2 girls that were in the house. Basically what happened was that the city took all of the remains and then handed over the remains to forensic anthropologists at Penn, at University of Pennsylvania, to try to identify the bones, like who possibly the victim of the bombing. And the city handed over the remains 36 years ago, and then to Penn never gave them back and started using them to demonstrate in classes how to do forensic investigations on forensic anthropology. And then what happened was, I think in 2019, Corsica or Corsa, or that massive online, I don't know what that's called, but I think it's called Corsa. Basically, this teacher who was using the bones in these demonstrations taught a class of 5,000 students using these bones. And it was just kind of this recently came out, like within the past month, that all of this happened. Anyway.
Yeah, that's yeah, it's appalling. And I actually, before all this came out in the news, I had been wondering about what happened to that block, actually. And I recently did a Google search, and it looks like there's new construction on that new block. And I don't think there's any signs or any plaque or anything that acknowledges like a historical, event that killed these people. And it's still not acknowledged because it's not a US sanctioned, bombing. So they're saying that, oh, that's a Philly thing. That's not a US thing.
There is a plaque that a school, an elementary school, not public, but a collective school that the children designed and installed a plaque on the corner of Osage, and so there is a marker.
Oh, good.
Now, but it was created by children.
So it's not official by the city.
The city.
Yeah.
It was a combined effort.
Yeah. But yeah. So and another part of what Mary was asking about, I would like to go to all these places and look through their archives and connect it all back and put them in context of what was happening at the time. So I definitely it's an ongoing process to research these places and someday go to those actual archives where I've been drawing a lot of these images. And there is that, and this is another thing, there's like in St. Louis, so this is like the site of the World's Fair. In 1904, they actually had a Filipino village there, where they brought different indigenous families and displayed them. And it became like an advertisement to, this is why we need to look at these savages. This is why we need to be there. But you know what? They're not, don't worry, they won't be U.S. citizen because they're brown, right? There's like all these weird things that happened, that there were the anti-imperialists, and some of them were in the Mark Twain school, who are really in the right mind and heart to say, no, that's not right. But then there's anti-imperialists who are just plainly racist, and like, we don't want these more brown people, as part of our country.
One of the things that is important about the work you do, Maria, and I can't imagine how difficult it is. This research is hard, and it's hard. But what your work does is it makes us participate, right? I mean, that's the power of experiencing your work. And I mean, we participate in it, and we participate in the racist and contentious dialogue of it, and the history. And I can't encourage people enough to take the opportunity, because Maria's work is in 3 spaces right now, to experience it and continue to learn from what you're doing. Are there any questions? I mean, I feel like there's been a lot said. Does anybody else have anything to add, or have any questions about Maria's work and the topics? I guess we could have a whole seminar on it. Well,
I think Ronnie from Japan is here. Good morning there.
Good morning to you. Good afternoon.
Early there.
Yeah. I remember seeing some of this work, I think early on, and had to say, it's real powerful stuff. It's important for people to get an idea of this history and the things that happen. And, one thing I appreciate is the fact that you're taking the time to like dig through this stuff and pull it up. So, it's good stuff. And I'm glad to see that you're like getting more visibility. So that's pretty much it. Have to actually run to work. So, but
Thank you. So good to see you.
so I just wanted to say, hey, and the stuff is good. I'm glad to
Thank
see that you're doing it. So keep it up. Right on.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I think we'll close because it's after 8, and again, thank you, Maria. And I will. I'm going to share links to the different places. I'll follow up with an email. You can see this talk online in a couple days, and hopefully you'll be able to experience Maria's work in person. And congratulations on it, and good luck, because it doesn't seem like you're done with benevolent assimilation, and I wish you the best for this work and success.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Come back next week. Peter Barbary and Daniel Traub is going to be speaking in conversation. So we'll hopefully you'll see you next week, and be well.
Right. Lori, is the chat? I just realized there's stuff in there I could have addressed too, but it's okay. But I wonder,